Alright, so welcome back. Today we're implementing a pretty simple enemy state machine that doesn't add too much functionality right now, but it does give us the ability to have our stagger and walk and idle states transfer in between different enemies that we make in the future. So let's dive in and get started. Alright, so where we left off last time, we have our player who can walk up to our enemy. Our enemy is going to get knocked back, and if our enemy follows our player, they're going to get caught up in collisions. There's a few issues though, namely, we can push our enemy around just like that. We're going to fix that relatively soon, not this video, but next time. And the second issue here that we're going to do, and this leads into a whole bunch of other problems that we need to, well, not problems necessarily, but features we need to add. So if I knock my enemy back, they actually should be knocked back further than they are knocked back. They're being knocked back to the end of the whatever radius it is that they come after us. So we'll see that they actually will end up getting knocked back more with the same amount of force. So let's go about creating a enemy state machine. So what I want to do is I want most of my enemies to be able to have access to this state machine functionality. Now when I wrote the log script, I discussed inheritance a bit, and I used it a little bit, but I didn't dive too much into it. So let's dive a little more into what inheritance is and how we're going to use that to our advantage. So first of all, in our log class, we're inheriting from enemy, which means that anything that the enemy script has, our log class is going to have as well. Now, I'm going to want most of my enemies to have a state machine so that they can differentiate between when they're in idle, when they're moving, when they're attacking, and perhaps some other states as well. Which means rather than making that state machine for each enemy individually, I can make it for the enemy class as a whole, and then that way, everything that is inheriting from enemy will bring that functionality with them as well. So, in my enemy script here, which is inheriting from mono behavior, first thing I'm going to do is create an enum. Now, I talked about this with the player. An enum is like a Boolean value, except instead of being true and false, it can be any number of things. It's just essentially creating different types, or in this case, states, that our enemy can have in their behavior. So I'm going to create a public enum, and I'm going to call it let's say enemy state. And in here, I'm going to declare the states I want my enemies to be able to have. So I want an idle state, I want a walk state, an attack state, and I also want a stagger state so that I can have them when they're knocked back so that they're not moving until they're set back to be in the walking state. So in order to use this enum in my class here, I now have to make a reference to it. So I'm going to create a public enemy state, and I'm going to call this current state. So now every single thing that inherits from the enemy script is going to have this. This means that if I make different enemies later, they're also going to have the same functionality. Now if I wanted to, I could add other states here. But I just want to show you really quickly. If we jump back into Unity and take a look at the log, as soon as this is done compiling, there we go. So current state is idle, we've got health and everything, and then the enum has this kind of drop-down menu that comes with it. Alright, so now when we do our knockback state here, what I want to do is I want to grab the information from the enemy, and I want to move its state into stagger. So in here, if enemy isn't null, then I want to grab the enemy script. So I'm going to say, let's do enemy.getComponent. The component I want to get is enemy, which will grab log even though it's not an enemy script because it inherits from enemy. And I want to say dot current state equals enemy state dot stagger. And then when I'm ending the knockback in here in the coroutine, after we set their velocity back to 0, I'm going to reset their state. So I'm going to say enemy dot get component, and the component I want to get is the enemy script dot current state is equal to enemy state dot, I'm going to put it back into idle, even though it might need to go into walk. In the enemies, or in the log script itself, I'll have it automatically turn to walk if it needs to be. So I'm going to save that. So when we knock an enemy back, we're going to put it in the stagger state, and after a certain amount of time, we're going to reset it back to the idle state. Now in my log script here, in start, I want to have it be in idle. So I'm going to say current state is equal to enemy state dot idle. And then, oh yeah, this is something else I wanted to fix. So I'm moving my physics object in the update, and I don't want to do that. Instead, I want to change this from update to fixed update, so that it's only moving on the physics calls, which is roughly, I think, 30 times a second. I could be wrong. Okay, cool. So now, when we check our distance, if our distance is in between the chase radius and the attack radius, we're going to want to have to change our state. Now, since I'm going to be changing the state a lot, I'm going to make a new method for that. So my new method is going to be a private void change state, and I want to pass in a value. And the value I want to pass in is enemy state that I'm going to call new state. So in this change state method, what I want to do is check that new state that is being passed in as a value against the current state, and if they're different, then I'm going to change the current state to be the new state. So the reason I'm doing this is I don't want to be constantly changing the state for animation purposes that we'll get into a few videos down the road. So what I'm going to say here is if current state is not equal to new state, then I'm going to say current state is equal to new state. So then in here, when I'm checking my distance, if we're in the movement or in the range where the log should be moving, I'm going to say change state, and I want to change state to enemy state dot move, or walk, I think I did. Yep. All right. Now, if I save this for a second, I want to add another requirement on here. So if our distance is what it's supposed to be, we're moving forward. But I also don't want the log to move forward if it's in that stagger state. So if we're in the right distance, and if we're in either the idle or the walk state, we're going to move forward. So I'm just going to add another if statement in here. I could add another and, but it's fine to do it this way. So I'm going to say if current state is equal to enemy state dot idle, or current state is equal to enemy state dot walk, because I don't want it to move towards the player if it's in the attack or in the stagger state, because I want it to actually be staggered. I don't want it to be moving through that. Okay, cool. So I'm going to save this. Let's go into Unity here and let's see if I broke it. First, I want to make sure that I have my log selected here so that we can keep an eye on its current state over here on the right. Its current state is going to be idle by default, and if we move into its walk range, it should start walking. So into its walk range here, so it's in walk, and now when I hit it, it went from staggered to, oh, okay. So what I want to do actually here is I want to make sure not just that it's in those two states, but that it's not in the stagger state. So logically, those two arguments aren't equivalent. Okay, so I'm going to say another and statement here. So and current state is not equal to enemy state dot, not idle, stagger. Okay, let's check that. If I'm making an error here, it seems like that's not what I did in my practice version of this, but we'll see. So, okay, walk over. Okay, so we went from stagger to idle that time. All right, I'm gonna reset the walk radius or the attack radius and see if that changes the behavior a little bit here. Okay, so I'm gonna move. Okay, it's just that I have my stagger set really low, but otherwise it's doing pretty much what it's supposed to do. All right, cool. So there we go. We have a pretty simple state machine that we've added, and this functionality can now be transferred to all of the enemies due to the principle of inheritance. The next thing we're going to cover is how to have these hurt boxes so that my player can't just walk up on our enemy here just like this. And it's also, the hurt boxes are also going to help not just push the enemy around. I know that's probably bugging some of you right now, but we'll get to that. All right, so if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the description down below. You can follow me on Twitter, find out when I post a new video. You can join my Discord where I'm chatting pretty much every day. And yeah, have yourselves a wonderful day.